I think it's undeniable that Jewish rights have to be championed. The rights of Jews and of all peoples to be able to come freely, worship, admire. Not only should there be a cry for Zion, there should be a shout out for Zion. Actually, the story about Rabbi Glick is quite interesting. Not only because of its horrific character, but because it shows, I think, what the problem we're facing regarding the Temple Mount and perhaps even the essence of Zionism, in that a simple human rights assembly was held here. The activities on behalf of Jewish presence on the Temple Mount is a legal one. It's anchored in the law for the protection of the holy places, and I think any human rights organization around the world would support that. And at the end of the conference, after he finished his work, he walked out in the street. An Arab approached him and said, "Are you Yehuda Glick? What you're doing is bothering me," and he shot him 4 times. Mr. Glick was not killing anybody or injuring anybody or destroying any structure. He was trying exactly to prevent that, destroying Israeli and Jewish historical artifacts, archaeological finds, as well as basic human rights of being able to freely access a holy site and to be able to worship and pray in that site, without tearing down walls, without tearing down buildings, without interfering. Different times could be set up, certain locations could be fixed so that you're not interfering with anybody else's rights. And that's what's called compromise and coexistence. Unfortunately, we're not facing neither compromise nor coexistence. The question of the status quo is actually something that started with the Christians who, under the Ottoman Empire, fought among themselves for the rights to the Church of the Nativity and the Church of the Sepulchre. And so the Ottomans placed a status quo. Whatever was at that time, actually in 1757 if you want to know, and then 1852, that's what's supposed to stay. And when the British took over, they continued that. But all through those years, of course, the Jews didn't count, because Jews did not have any political power behind them, nor any European country. And so they had no real rights except by custom. And the Ottomans, as other Muslims before them, tolerated Jews only at the Western Wall and occasionally at the gravesite of Rachel in Bethlehem. Along came the British and they said, wait a second, the Jews want to pray with benches. They want to set up a mechitza, a partition between the men and the women. The Arabs and the Muslims said no. Said, well, let's arrange a new status quo. They can put up screens, but they have to take them away. This was 1928, November 1928, the white paper 1928. The Mufti didn't like this at all because he claimed that the Western Wall was actually El Burak and belonged to the Temple Mount, or what he called in Arabic Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary. And that's which led to the 1929 riots, as the Mufti continued to incite, continued to interfere. In '67, when Israel once again took over the old city of Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount, that memory was still strong. And since it resulted in riots, all Israeli governments since then said, we willingly assume for ourselves a status quo. Jews can enter the Temple Mount as tourists, not as Jews. They can't pray, they can't say lamentations or psalms or anything of a worship character. They can only be a tourist walking around. They can't build anything, they can't demand anything. And we allow the Waqf, the Muslim Islamic trust, to administer the site. The Waqf, this religious trust, actually is under the administration of Jordan, Jordan pours maybe minimum $5 million a year into maintaining its control over the Temple Mount through local Arabs. And actually, until March 2013, there was always fighting in between. Was it the PA, the Palestinian Authority? Was it Hamas? Was it Fatah? Who was going to be head of the Waqf? Until Mahmoud Abbas went over to King Abdullah II and said, you know what? You take over the patronage, we'll do the work on the ground. And that's the situation today. It gets complicated, but in one sentence, King Abdullah II's great-great-grandfather, Sharif Hussein ibn Ali, okay, who's the father of Abdullah and Faisal of World War I fame, he claimed to be the Caliph in 1924 for 8 months and assumed for himself the title of the custodian of all the holy places, Mecca, Medina, and El-Quds, Jerusalem in Arabic. No one recognized him, but since then, the Jordanians claim an historic role in the administration of the holy sites of Jerusalem. All the problems that we face now, at the present moment, when we're talking, really stem mostly from the fact that the Oslo Accords were signed and the Arabs wanted full control of the Temple Mount. And what they did was they built an underground mosque under Al-Aqsa and dumped maybe 200 tons of earth without any archaeological review or supervision. We had to collect them, and since then, Professor Gabi Barkai, for example, has been sifting them and finding first and second temple remains and later. In other words, the Arabs are engaged in a temple denial process. The Jews had no connection with Jerusalem, especially the Temple Mount. They weren't here. There were no temples. The only way we could prove it to the world, not to fellow Jews who have no problem with this, is to say, look, we can show you that there are foundations, there are buildings, we can show you pottery, we can show you anything else like we do all over the land of Israel, but they won't allow us, and the government won't allow us because they will inflame passions. Their passions are inflamed. They can go to other places around the world and claim the rights that we want to claim for ourselves. They just won't allow us the very basic human rights of being able to prove who we were, that we did indeed have a past here, which means we have a future here. And that's the problem the Arabs are facing with us. We have a very good case. They don't want our case to be heard. They are covering up things. They are defacing material. They are planting gardens over Herodian structures, and they won't allow us at all to prove our case. The incident is an embarrassment for Israel's government because that status quo, while giving the day-to-day administration internally of the Temple Mount, the security supervision is supposed to be the Israeli police. And here we had, in about 1996, trucks coming all night long and taking out material and dumping them somewhere in the valley on the eastern side of the Temple Mount. And eventually, one of these archaeologists who came up there saw this dirt going away. He said, you can't do that. In Israel, I don't know about any other country in the world, you cannot build anywhere unless first an archaeologist goes there and does a little bit of what we call a emergency dig, just to see that he's not falling on a Hasmonean palace or a Roman church, a Roman building, or a Byzantine church. And he said, what's happening? And so he first got arrested because he was interfering with the ongoing elements of what was going on until things became clear. But the government didn't do a thing. It was private money, money from academic institutions and wealthy Jewish patrons who allowed the sifting operation to begin, which means you had to recollect all the dirt from where the Arabs dumped it, bring it over to a place near what's called Yeshivat Bet Orot on the Mount Scopus, lay it out, and for the past, I don't know, over a decade, they have been sifting through, finding the material. It's just symbolic that even when we had proof in our hands, if I can say so, it just went through our fingers, literally. Unfortunately, the recent experience has been, if you allow Arabs and those Arabs who refer themselves as Palestinians to supervise or control a Jewish religious site, not much of it is left. I pointed out what they did to the underground mosque and the artifacts of the Temple Mount. When Israel returned here in 1967, over 30,000 graves had been desecrated on the Mount of Olives. After the Oslo Accords, the tomb of Joseph, outside of Shechem, which you might know as Nablus, was destroyed 3 times by Arabs. It's very difficult, for example, we had a fight over going down to the synagogue in Jericho, which was a synagogue before the Muslims came to the area. So if Israeli rule, sovereignty, law is not in place over the Temple Mount, there will not be a Jewish site there at all, remnants, and Christians won't be able to go there. I'm not talking only about Jews. If a Christian pastor with his people opens up the New Testament and says this is where Jesus overturned the tables of the moneylenders and raises his finger, he will be thrown out of the Temple Mount, if not that finger cut off by some Muslim who got angry at him from quoting from a different book than the Quran. Instead of bringing all the versions of the Holy Scriptures, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim together, instead of building up compromise and saying we can share, in the cave of the patriarch in Hebron, we share. 10 days a year, we, the Jews, get the building in its entirety. 10 days, the Muslims. The rest of the time, it's split up time-wise and spatially, and no one suffers. Of course we want more. Everybody wants the whole cake, but you can't. So compromise. We're willing to, all the time. We've made these suggestions. They wanted all or nothing, and usually, in most cases of all of nothing, especially in the Arab-Israel conflict, the other side gets nothing. I think I'm being very fair, because only under Israeli Jewish rule will the rights of all other religions and all other minorities be protected. The historical record has been, wherever the Muslims have ruled, it's very difficult to get freedom of rights. Try to pray in a church on Sunday in Saudi Arabia. If you're not Muslim, try to enter, the mosque there in Mecca. Christians, I'm not talking about Jews, Christians have been hanged in many other Muslim countries around the world recently. This resurgence of an Islamic fanaticism is dangerous for all living people, it seems, including Shiites if you're being attacked by Sunnis, and Sunnis if you're being attacked by Shiites. They don't even discriminate between Muslim sects. So this is irrational, this is fanatical, this is something wrong morally and ethically, and it should not be supported. And so, for example, when Muslims from Vienna in 2010 went to Cordoba in Spain to try to pray in a cathedral, which they had stolen from the Catholics when they conquered Spain in this 8th century, and when Spain liberated itself from Muslim rule and turned it back into a church, we're not asking any less than what they would want for themselves. So why can't they understand us? When Muslims pray in the lawn around Westminster Abbey, don't they realize that we would like to do the very same thing in the courtyards of the Temple of God? Without taking down a building, without disturbing them. Find us a time, find us a place. Once we begin to build coexistence, cooperation, and a philosophy of compromise, that's when peace and understanding will come. If they stay in their refusal position, rejection position, unfortunately, there'll be violence. It's very difficult for me, in a logical frame of mind, to deal with the claim that we are Judaizing what is ours. It would be like someone going to Rome and say the Vatican is Catholicizing part of Rome. I mean, that's the historical reality. This was the Jewish capital for over 3,000 years. David, Solomon, the kings of Israel, the prophets of Israel, the priests of Israel, the princes of Israel, they all walked, talked, and lived here long before Muhammad dreamt up a night journey on a winged horse to come here and make his claim. I appreciate religions and their myths and their beliefs, but do not compare a winged horsed flight from the Saudi Arabian Peninsula to Jerusalem to the fact that Romans and Greeks were here and left evidence of our existence here and destroyed our temples and fought us. When we talk about sacrifices on the Temple Mount, we're not talking only about ritual sacrifices as dictated by the Bible. We're talking about Jewish soldiers, zealots, Hasmoneans, Maccabees, who sacrificed fighting a foreign conqueror here on the Temple Mount, which is the true Mount of Zion. Those are other sacrifices we made for this city. When the Israeli soldiers of the IDF in '67 crossed the border, after Jordan opened up fire first, they made sacrifices. These are to be memorialized also on the Temple Mount. When Herzl wrote in the Jewish State that he wanted to recreate the state, the Jewish state, and in his book Out Neuland, visited Jerusalem, open it up to the end of the book. He visits the temple which has been rebuilt. His temple is not that religious, shall we say, but it's a symbol of a connection between our ancient past, which is not only archaeological and not only scientific and not only rational, it's the history, the culture, the legacy of who we are as Jews. Take the Mount of Zion out of Jerusalem, there's no Jerusalem. And as Uri Tzvi Greenberg said, take Jerusalem out of the state of Israel, there's no Israel. You undefine us. We are Jews. We Judaize. That's what we do. And it's legal and it's perfectly positive to do that because you do not hurt anybody in that activity. Zionism for me without Mount Zion is just another ism. It could be communism, it could be socialism, it could be fascism, God forbid. Ism is a movement, is an ideology, is a structure of organizing. Zion puts the focus. We start at Jerusalem and work out. Under the mandate, we had to work from the outside in because of the political and social situation. After '67, there are no excuses to concentrate on Jerusalem as the city for the Jews, as its capital, its religious, cultural, and legal place of geography, and as the prophet said in Isaiah, a house of prayer for all peoples. We do not deny you your rights. We're the ones who are being denied the rights. Zionism has come to return the rights of Jews to their country, to their spiritual, and to their cultural history, legacy, and future. I think it's undeniable that Jewish rights have to be championed, and a movement such as, for example, Cry for Zion is to be applauded because it deals with what is right, what is correct, what needs to be done, and which doesn't harm anybody else. The rights of Jews and of all peoples to be able to come freely, worship, admire, review what the historical past was, to see what was there, should not be restricted. It should be opened as much as possible. In that sense, not only should there be a cry for Zion, there should be a shout out for Zion. The voices should be raised, and if Cry for Zion can help, I'm all for it.